Year after year, 20-somethings flock to New York City in search of the two L's, labels and love.
But the two labels we're talking about today are husband and wife. So chic.
I can't help but wonder, how exactly did Matthew Broderick become Sarah Jessica Parker's real-life Mr. Big?
It's a Sex and the City worthy couple on this episode of Hooked Up to Hitched.
The family that votes together stays together. SJP and Maddie B were spotted in the West Village with their son, first-time voter, James.
Aw, I can't believe he's 18. Let's take it back to how his parents fell for each other.
The prince of the box office met the Hollywood it girl in 1991 when Broderick was directing a play for the Naked Angels Theater Company in New York, which is owned by SJP's brothers, Pippin and Toby.
The future Sex and the City star was coming off of a very public 8-year relationship with bad boy Robert Downey Jr.
Luckily for Matthew, RDJ didn't have that killer Iron Man suit yet. And honestly, anyone would seem more stable than Robert Downey Jr. in the 80s.
Broderick was shy at first, but eventually mustered up the courage to leave SJP a message on her answering machine.
Do I sound like I'm kidding?
Awkward.
Hi, Sarah Jessica? Or is it just Sarah, or just Jessica? Anyway, it's me, Ferris Bueller. I mean, Matthew Broderick.
Not exactly Mr. Big calling, but thankfully Carrie called him back. They started dating shortly after, and in 1995, the couple returned to Broadway, this time as scene partners in the revival of How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying.
It marked the first time the acting duo worked together, and it seemed like they wanted it to be their last.
That's right. When interviewed about the musical, Parker told the New York Times, quote, "We work together, we eat together, we sleep together, we wake up together. It occurred to me that was a dangerous part of this, that our world would become very small."
Sarah, you're just describing life in quarantine. It's actually not that bad as long as you have Netflix and sourdough bread.
And TikTok? Well, maybe not back then. In spite of their struggle to square their professional and personal lives on stage, Broderick walked away from the production with a Tony Award and, a few months later, a new fiance.
So we had to learn to accept each other sort of pretending to be somebody else, which was odd.
He proposed to you during that run, right?
He did, yeah, so maybe it wasn't that odd.
In May 19, 1997, Parker and Broderick tied the knot at a synagogue in Manhattan's Lower East Side.
Broderick's own sister officiated the ceremony, and the roughly 100 guests in attendance had no idea they were about to see a wedding.
They invited friends to the Big Apple for a, quote, party, and then sprung a secret ceremony on them. How were their friends not suspicious?
It's like, hey, we're having like a little shindig at a synagogue, wear a tuxedo, and I don't know, bring a blender.
Of course, SJP walked down the aisle looking absolutely stunning in a gorgeous black Morgan Le Fay dress. So fashion forward.
Yeah, Parker says she didn't pick black to be a badass, but that's what badasses always say.
In October 2002, Parker gave birth to the couple's first child, son James Wilkie. And while they were overjoyed, pregnancy wasn't as easy the second time around.
Parker and Broderick have been very private about their personal life, but they announced that they were using a surrogate to carry their second child. And in 2009, were able to welcome 2 beautiful and healthy twin girls into the world.
The experience took a huge toll on Parker, though, who described the isolation of dealing with surrogacy as secretive and worrisome, telling Vogue, quote, "You can only talk about it to your husband, and he just doesn't want to talk about it as much as you do." And while they've been a staple of celebrity coupledom for decades, Sarah and Matthew have had plenty of gossip floating around about their marriage.
Since playing a gay man in the 1988 film Torch Song Trilogy, rumors have swirled that Broderick himself may be gay.
And while the actor says he's straight and happily married, when pressed about his friendship with Nathan Lane and his proclivity for Vespa scooters, Broderick told the Advocate, quote, "Maybe I am gay. It all sounds suspicious to me. I sold my green Vespa, interestingly enough, to a gay friend. And total coincidence, I own a green Vespa."
Well, whether they're on the brink of divorce or the happiest pair in New York publicly, they're 2 peas in a pod. In 2017, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, and just this past year overcame their greatest fear as husband and wife, working together.
Reuniting on Broadway for the first time in 25 years, Parker and Broderick were scheduled to bring Neil Simon's Plaza Suite to the Great White Way right before that whole global pandemic thing happened. But even in quarantine, they seem to be doing well.
Our show will be back next spring, and
We hope.
and we can't wait to share it with you.
If you ask Sarah, the secret to marital bliss is simple.
I think just not talking about your marriage.
Don't worry, you don't have to talk about your marriage. That's our job. Eileen, let's break it down.
All right, let's do this. So, Brian, why do you think this couple really works?
I mean, it's hard to think of a more classic New York City couple. I mean, Sarah Jessica Parker, Matthew Broderick, they love theater, they love Broadway, they're like actual theater actors, they love the New York Mets, and they live in New York City. I mean, it's easy to live in the West Village when you're very wealthy, but like at a time when people are supposedly fleeing the city for the suburbs, like you've got this New York royalty, you know? They are owning it and they are staying put. And I think that's a big part of why their relationship works.
Yeah, so, but even though, you know, they do stay out of the spotlight a lot when they're not on camera, they still kind of somehow make the way, unfortunately, into the tabloids. But Sarah Jessica is not afraid to call out the tabloids if and when she needs to. I've got to pull up this savage quote from her. She goes, "Hey, National Enquirer and your sister publications, why not celebrate a marriage of 22 years and relationship of 27 years? Because despite your endless harassment and wasted ink, we are nearing 3 decades of love, commitment, respect, family, and home. There's your scoop from a reliable source." From Sarah Jessica's mouth herself. I mean, they're very happy together.
And we have to say, these two are both survivors. They both grew up in Hollywood in the 80s, child actors. I bet they're right now at home, reading in bed, being like, hey, remember that crazy party that wasn't on Instagram? Yeah, that was nuts. You know, they can like reminisce about how wild things were.
You know, I bet they're really, really thrilled that a lot of that social media stuff wasn't going on during their time back then. But yeah, I mean, they get each other though, right? I think that must bond them too. It's like, oh, remember what it was like to be famous in the 80s? Yeah, I get it. So they've got it, they connect that way. So there's not too many people that have actually been famous back then and have stuck around as long. So they've been through it all.
Well, which couple do you want to see go from hooked up to hitched next? Let us know. Bye, Eileen.
Bye, Brian.